Dave, there is never a dull moment here.
No, there is not. I was so excited. You're getting ready to go live, and then you disappeared.
Yeah, one day I'm going to have this hardwired so we can get this. And again, so glad to be here. It's Wednesday. It's after Christmas. Dave, did you make it through?
I did. It was pretty low key at our house. We all just stayed here at the house, didn't really go and do much. Yeah, it was great. Yourself?
We had a COVID Christmas, so that means it's been put off for a week. So we'll see how it goes, and we'll be celebrating soon.
That means you get to celebrate individually in your own rooms by yourself. Is that pretty much the way it all works?
Yeah, that with FaceTime, we can just watch each other. Oh, well,
The new world we live in.
exactly. Well, we're glad you're here, Dave, and we're glad all of you are joining us live again as we are here talking about retirement. And we always encourage you to submit your questions for Dave so we can come on and talk about various topics from Medicare, long-term care, Social Security, boy, even reverse mortgage. Dave, you've got a lot of new webinars even coming out that everyone's getting signed up for.
We do. I'm very excited. We've got our Evolving Retirement Law webinar that's just recently been released. We had our first course on it, had our Foundation for a Secure Retirement course. We've also done our first course there. And then we've got our upcoming Roth IRA, Roth 401k course. So yeah, very exciting times. We're working on new ones as well. It's time for some more education in 2022.
And if you have any questions on these topics, go ahead and get those submitted in here and we'll get a break between our questions and go ahead and get those in there. Dave, I was afraid to click on any banner to show up because I don't want to lose you again. Anytime I click on a button here, I'm afraid it's going to disappear.
Well, if it happens and I'm left, we'll just go through, do our best to go through the rest of the show, answer whatever questions I can. If you're stuck by yourself, I guess you'll have to tell jokes.
Okay. Sounds great. Well, Dave, I want to start off. This is our main piece I wanted to talk about this morning. And I thought this was a really good way to start out and kick out this final show of the year. So we have Vic and Marjorie. They're looking at buying a small vacation home for their retirement. Their primary resident is completely paid off. How might this affect their taxes come retirement in 10 years?
I don't really see a big tax issue here. If you look at it, I mean, at some point, I guess if they were to sell the home at a gain, they could have some tax consequences to that. I see this more as a cash flow issue. When we look at it, and I don't know their situation, they may be in a situation where they've got all the money they need. But what we often find, people are buying these second homes and they don't necessarily turn into a great investment. You're covering the cost of that all year long. You're having to pay the taxes, the insurance, the upkeep, all those things. What we often find is people are going to have that same experience by just going and renting a place the few years that they want to, or the few weeks they want to use, not few years. Like if you're going to use it year after year consistently, going to want to buy a place. But again, really is going to come down to how are they using this property. If it's only a few weeks out of the year, really would say, hey, why not look at investing that money and just renting a place when you want to go visit somewhere?
So Dave, there's two things I'm looking at this. So Vic and Marjorie, we're talking a vacation home that they're going to use. I'm assuming they'll use it, or maybe they rent it out, or maybe they're even just buying into a rental property and they want to be able to use that and be able to rent that out. What do you think about it as we're getting into real estate in retirement?
Well, one of the challenges is just keeping up with it. I mean, the older we get, the less we want to deal with problems. And when you've got real estate, sooner or later, there's going to be problems. It's just the way it works. I mean, it happens in our own homes. Sooner or later, we've got a plumbing issue. The carpets need to be replaced. The roof got blown off in the windstorm, whatever the case may be. We've got to deal with those. So this is where, again, not against it. If any of you have ever read much of Tony Robbins' books, he wrote a book about retirement. And in there, he talked a lot about trying to, people think they have to buy everything. We think we've got to have all this money. We've got to buy all these things. What we often find is we can rent these things much easier. Now, it's maybe not as exciting for you to go to the country club talking to your friends. So much more exciting to say, look, I own this vacation home. But reality of it is all you're doing is incurring substantial expenses that you could cut out and then just go wherever you want. I mean, the other nice thing, if you rent, you can go wherever you want, any year you want, wherever city, state, whatever you want to go to.
Dave, I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with one of my friends in Georgia here, and he was talking about getting his boat. And I said, well, how many times do you use your boat a year? And he goes, well, we probably use it about once or twice a year. And I thought, boy, that's really strange to own a boat for 2 weeks out of the year. versus renting. And so I asked about, hey, what about renting? He goes, I like to have my own boat so I can have that freedom. But Dave, you talk about things because there's storage, there's upkeep, there's licenses. It's the same thing. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because a lot of times in retirement, we feel like we have to have all of the next big things. We have to own these things. But what you're saying is, let's just do some small adjustments and that might help.
And many times, especially when we're talking about property CR, they end up in areas where they require a lot of maintenance. People that that are in an area where they can get up in the mountains, they put that cabin up in the mountains. If you're near a beach, you throw that house on the beach. Well, both of them create major issues from a maintenance side. If you're up in the mountains, all that weather and the snow and everything else coming in creates issue. If you're on the beach, that salt water creates issues. And I've seen it over and over and over the last 25 years. Is people get these all excited, and in 5 years they're like, look, I hate using it. I'm spending a ton of money to maintain it. I can't stand. In fact, every time I use it, I work. The problem is every time I go there, all I'm doing is working. So you see them sell those off. So again, not saying you can't do it. Many people make it work effectively for their retirement, but I'd say, hey, do a little homework. Make sure this is what you want to commit to before, especially now, even for a small vacation home. I mean, that could be $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 or more, depending on where they're looking at.
I think that's such great advice, Dave. Let me jump down to my next one here from Glenn and Lydia. So Glenn's 50, Lydia's 60, and they're looking into Roth conversions. Should they convert now or wait until closer to retirement?
A lot of it's going to come down to maybe other benefits that they're getting right now. Also, they're going to want to look at their income. I'd guess by this age, a high probability they've got the kids out of the house at this point if they had any children. But if you've got kids in the home, these are things you do have to take into consideration. You've got to look at those child tax credits if you're eligible for those. If you're getting education credits for your kids going to college and your income's in a level where you can get those, you've got to be careful. But for most people, I'd say, yeah, now's a good time. Let's start looking at where we're at now. Even if you're in a high income bracket, let's say you're in the 37% bracket, we're finding as many retirees are staying in that bracket, and it's going to go up. So it's like, look, why not take it off the table now? And as rates go up, even if you're in a high income bracket, you just don't have to worry about it again.
And Dave, I look at this as well because we just don't have the backstory on most of these. And so we look at something like Glenn, if he's 50, he's working, and let's say he's just contributing to a regular 401k at the office. Could another advice say, hey, let's see if we can do some Roth instead of just regular 401k at work, and maybe see if that might help a little bit as he's moving forward? It
is very interesting. I appreciate you bringing that up, CR. When we talk about this, conversions are usually the topic we cover. And so that's where people get excited about. But you're right. Many people are trying to convert while they still put money into their traditional accounts. And it's like, wait, this is really not making sense. You're trying to do one thing here and you're counteracting it by what you're doing on this other side. So you're right. There are contributions that can be made into those tax-free accounts. Go ahead and do so.
And I want to encourage you, if you're with us live, go ahead and submit your retirement question. Because again, we're covering all sorts of topics. Every time we jump on, we're throwing a new topic at Dave, and we're talking about being safe in retirement. Dave, the one thing you really focus on is taking, or at least eliminating the best we can, risk in retirement. And why do we want to do that?
Because it's an area that none of us spend enough time on. I mean, reality, when we look at other advisors out there, and we talk to thousands of them over our lifetime, for sure on my end, talk to these people, they're just not focused on getting you safely through retirement. I can't tell you the number of times that I've sat down with people, and I don't do it anymore. I'm just too busy educating. But when I'd sit down with people and we'd start going through their plan, and we would create a plan that's based upon risk. And all of a sudden they'd look at us all sad, and they'd be like, this isn't what my advisor showed me. They showed me I was going to be fine. But, well, we want to believe that. We want to believe. And again, if it happens, it's great. But if you're not testing that plan, in fact, we see it right now, CR, people are getting almost punch drunk. I don't know what the right term would be for it. But when we look at what the market's doing, we've got everybody retiring, everybody getting out of their jobs, everybody's thinking that the market's never going to change, that, hey, we've had all this growth for 13 years. It's going to be that way forever. I'm good for the next 50 years. If I retired at age 50, CR, it ain't going to be true. In fact, this morning I was spending a lot of time thinking about this, and I don't know how to put it into an education platform, but we're going to have some issues the next market crash. We're going to have a lot of people that retired right now thinking, hey, I'm fine, thinking that the market's never going to change and it's going to drop 40%. And we're going to have a crisis on our hands of retirees. And again, it may not hit in that 10 years when it drops, but I'll tell you 20 years or whenever it is, 4 years, 5 years, I'll tell you 10 years out from there when all the money's gone and they're 75, 80 years old, trying to figure out how they get through till they live until age 90, we're going to have some major issues going on.
And I appreciate you dealing with that, Dave, especially as you talk about the education side. And that's why we're here. We're here to make sure that everyone has that opportunity to become educated in case things like this do happen and when they happen. It's like you're not saying it's not now, but when.
And Sierra, it's not doom and gloom. Sometimes people get into our webinars and we talk about negative things, and you have to. As a risk person, you've got to talk about those negative things, and they just think, oh, this is all doom and gloom. This is, all pessimistic stuff. It's not. Again, when we look at our plans, what we want to do is take the worst case scenario, and if that works, then hey, we know it's going to work regardless. If it doesn't, then hey, what are you willing to look at? Again, hopefully it does everything you think it'll do. Your returns will be higher than we project. Your out-of-pocket costs for Medicare and those costs will be less than we project. Again, that's all just going to be great news if it happens, and that's what we hope happens. But if it doesn't, I don't want you in your late 80s trying to live off Social Security, wondering how in the world you're going to get through the next 5 or 10 years.
I definitely agree. Well, Dave, let's jump down to my next one here from Bert. So Bert is 67 and recently lost his wife. A coworker said he should be able to claim her Social Security benefits until he is ready to claim his own. Should he claim her benefits? And how will that impact his own when he retires at 70?
Yeah, the coworker's right. The nice thing about spousal survivor benefits, not if you're talking about living benefits, but survivor benefits, there's no deemed filing, which means that Bert would be able to start with hers and let his grow. Say his were going to be higher than hers if he waited until age 70, but maybe at this point they were lower than hers because he hadn't gotten the delayed retirement credits yet. He would be able to start with those benefits from his deceased spouse and then be able to change to his own once he gets to age 70. So it's a great benefit that many people don't realize. Think they only have one option when a spouse passes away. That's not the case. And sometimes requires more planning. Here, again, all they got to look at is what are her benefits today? What are his benefits in the future? His are going to be higher at some point in the future. Let those grow.
So Dave, you're saying that Bert, if he doesn't do this, he's just leaving money on the table that otherwise would just go away.
Yeah, and it happens all too often, CR. I can't tell you the amount of money that's left on the table of Social Security. Now, from a financial standpoint of the system, I guess that's good. But from a individual family standpoint, if you end up leaving thousands of dollars on the table you didn't need to, kind of sad, especially for many people that could use that money.
And Dave, let's just briefly touch on Social Security because again, this is such a hot topic, and I know that you're super invested into this because it's a plan that is going to be around. But there's a lot of people who are saying, "I don't think so." But you're saying, "Wait, hold on," because there is an option for us to really see some great benefit from this in the future.
Yeah, there definitely are. And when we look at it, I get it. Again, from the standpoint of financial stability, it shows that 2033, the program's going to run out of money. Got a lot of misleading information that's being promoted out there as well about the program. I get where you have concerns, but again, we've got to look at the program itself, how well it's liked, and how important it is to the overall financial stability of our country. I mean, can you imagine, CR, having a program disappear that is providing the only source of income to 40% of our retirees, one of our largest blocks of people, those baby boomers, all of a sudden 40% of them wake up in the morning and there ain't a penny coming into their accounts. We as a country have got much more severe problems than that. I mean, you're going to have a collapse of everyone's accounts. You're going to have complete third world country come in because of the poverty it's going to create. And so we don't see that happening. There are fixes. Yes, it's going to require us all to pay a little bit more in. Yes, it's going to require some of us to delay benefits that we think we should get at maybe 62. We can't get till 64 now, whatever the case may be. But these things are going to happen, and we'll see a brighter day in the future.
And Dave, I'm assuming you're keeping a close eye on this as it continues to change over time, but you'll be able to update and grow your webinars accordingly as you get that information.
Absolutely. And the one thing I'll tell, especially those self-employed, I can't tell you over the years how many times I've heard this either. And there was time in my own life, I must admit, back in my 20s, that I promoted some of this, that if you had an S corporation, hey, pay yourself lower wages, invest the difference. Social Security's not going to be there. Maybe even going back 20 years ago, some of this discussion was out there. It's not going to be there. The problem is most people never invest. In fact, if I look back at the clients that did that, I bet there's only maybe 20% of the people that ever invested any of their money. So you're saying, look, I'm going to take what may or may not be on the table off and then take a zero. It's like, instead of taking my chances with something that may or may not happen, I'll just take a zero because I'm going to spend all the money and not invest it anyway. That's where we've got to stop. We've got to start investing more. And if you want to, adjust your Social Security in some way where you're taking some of those benefits and investing them, invest the money and invest it wisely.
And Dave, I know you have a lot to say on this next topic as well. So I'm going to pull up William and Bella. So they're 55 and 58. They've been paying towards a life insurance policy for almost a decade now. Should an untimely death happen, would it be best for monthly payouts from the plan or a lump sum?
Yeah. So when we look at these life insurance policies, to my knowledge, almost every one of them is going to be structured where you're going to take that lump sum payment. So if you have annuities, it's going to be a little bit different. If they've got death benefits, there's some options there to either take it immediately, usually a reduced amount, or take it over a period of 5 years where the beneficiary would still be able to get payouts. But from a life insurance standpoint, most people are going to take it immediately. It is tax-free in most situations. That if that were to happen, it'd be tax-free income. And then they've just got to figure out how they can invest that to not create a bunch of tax problems again in the future with that extra money for whoever ends up getting those benefits.
Dave, the one thing I'm excited about is obviously they have this life insurance policy, but a lot of times we kind of set it and forget it. And I think a lot of times we're looking at this by saying, hey, this will be there when I need it, but we're really not keeping an eye on this ever.
Yeah, and I have had a guy on my webinars over the last few days that has had some really bad experiences in life. It appears. I mean, he just seems to have nothing but negative things to say about things that are going on, and I respect everyone's opinion. But a lot of what he says comes down to just what you said. See, our people are not paying enough attention. Even when you get this stuff in place, you've still got to pay attention to it. You can't just ignore it. And a lot of stuff he's saying is like, look, they went 10, 20 years, never looked at this stuff. Well, that's not necessarily a fault of the policy or what they did. It's a fault of them for not making adjustments. I mean, everything takes time. Think about your car. If you just got in your car and drove it for 20 years without taking time to change the tires, put oil, I mean, at some point, that sucker is going to blow up on you. You're going to have a bad experience. Well, same thing with these retirement things. You can't just set it in there and think, 20 years, going to wake up and some dude gets lucky or lady and she, they made millions of dollars because it just so happened that it happened correctly, but that's not going to be most people.
And Dave, we look at this, even if we look at term or whole life, I mean, all of these things you're saying the same thing is a lot of people just set it up and say, great, well, this goes for 20 years and I'll look at that then and we'll kind of adjust it at that point. And there's a lot of mistakes that if we just continue to do that with life. And I really like what you're talking about with the car, because it would be the exact same thing.
And there's problems, CR. I mean, a lot of the way they're done, I mean, that can create some willingness to just let things ride. A lot of it's designed to where you don't have to spend a lot of time with it. But again, just because you don't have to spend a lot of time doesn't mean you spend no time. When we look at it, that we still need to take some time and make sure everything's structured correctly. I mean, you look at it now, so we've got some of the indexed insurance policies. I mean, I'm getting reports from some of the carriers, 18, 20% people are up this year. Now, the market's been great everywhere else. Well, they can lock these in if they choose to do so. They can lock and say, look, I'm going point to point. I'm going to lock it in right now to just take the risk off the table. And if you're managing that appropriately, can be great options for you to lock in some gains. Now, again, if the market keeps going up, you end up losing that extra growth. But if it drops, you just locked yourself into a great return for the year.
Yeah. So I think it's very wise that you find somebody that you can obviously work with, because on our own, there's a lot of things we're leaving out there that we just don't have a clue about. And we're just going to say, hey, we'll deal with it when we get there.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got to take the time. We've got to stop spending more time on our vacations than we spend on our planning for our retirement. We've got to make that a priority going forward for all of us.
Dave, let me jump to my next one here. We've got Wayne and Dorothy. They're both 68 and they're set to retire in the next 2 years. They recently learned that they have a traditional retirement set up. Is it too late for them to consider an investment or product to help them?
Let me talk a little bit about this from a traditional retirement setup. What I'm assuming here is what we see of 95% of retirees is all of their money set into tax deferred accounts. So they've got Social Security as their base. They put 95% of their assets into 401ks, IRAs, 403bs, things that are deferred. And then they've got what's left probably in a taxable account through money market, certificate of disappointment, or something of that nature. No, it's not too late. What we want is we want that spread out. We talk all the time about asset diversity during our working years. We need to be able to spread that out. So if the market goes down, we don't lose everything. In retirement, we really need income diversity. And you can have all the assets in the world, but if they're not producing any income once you get to retirement, it does you no good. During your working years, it's like, hey, it went from 1 million to 2 million to 3 million, whatever. Hey, that's great, because then there'll be a day I pull it out. Well, if then you get to the end of the day, you have 3 million of assets, but there's no income. Well, what good did it do me? Well, how did it help me? And so what we want is multiple streams. We want some principal protection in there. So if the markets drop, they don't have to worry about all their assets going with it. And they are in a good place. People often think, look, I'm in my 60s, maybe I'm going into my 70s. It's just too late to do any of this. People, average life expectancy, once you get to this age, 84 for a male, 88 for a female. Some of you are going to live into your 90s. So about 10% to live past 100. You got a lot of years left you need to prepare for. And why not do what you can to get yourself in the best position?
Dave, how many streams of income do you think the average American has?
Average American, two. They've got their Social Security, and they've got some type of, probably rolled everything into their IRA. They've got those RMDs that are going to come in, and that's two. And some one. Again, 40% of America, they got one stream. It's Social Security. They have nothing left. Maybe they saved 5 or 10 grand in the beginning. Some event ate that away, and now they're just stuck with monthly Social Security checks.
So Dave, if I'm watching this and I say, oh boy, that's me, I've got 1 or 2 streams, what's the next step? Because you're really hitting home, I'm guessing, with a lot of people that are watching.
Well, number one, if it's only one, is you've got to start saving more. Again, if your Social Security is going to be your only retirement, you're going to have a retirement that's not going to be lackluster. I will tell you that right now. Not going to look anything like I would think you would hope for when you look at retirement. Now, if you've got 2 streams and you put a bunch of money aside already, it's really starting to do planning to where you can get it into different tax-free buckets. So you can get into vehicles that would allow you to have multiple streams of tax-free income so that you can avoid not only tax rate risk, but many of the other risks we talk about.
Well, thank you, Dave. And I've got a few more questions I'm going to throw at you before we end today's show. We've got Isaac and Linda, 63 and 64. They have begun the adoption process for their 2 teen foster sons. Would they be able to make them beneficiaries on their policies now, or should they wait until the adoption is final?
First off, Isaac and Linda, congratulations on that. As someone that's just finalizing the stage of adoption for our daughter, hopefully it'll be done within the next couple of weeks. Very exciting times, but they are going to need to wait, because really up until the point that they end up getting adopted, these individuals in most circumstances are a ward of the state. They belong to whatever state you're in, and they're the responsibility of them. So it is something that they would want to wait for. Now, there may be a situation where they could get a trustee set up and they would be able to list these as beneficiaries, but really they should, at this point, it looks like they're close enough. Let's wait until it all gets done, then make changes. And anytime you're adopting, this should happen. Once you make those adoptions, you need to go back, look at your trust, make whatever changes need to be made to account for the needs of that new child or new children, as the case may be in their situation.
Dave, let's look at this. I'm just going to hypothetically, let's say that Isaac and Linda are multimillionaires and they're setting money aside and they're basically just saying, hey, when our time comes, we're going to gift this all over. Does that create harm in the future for those two boys coming in?
Yeah, high probability of it. And with anyone, I mean, it's not just someone in the foster, even your own children. I see it time and time and time again that parents think the best thing they can do for their kids is just give them a bundle of money, and somehow that's going to solve life's problems for them. And it isn't the case. The best ones I've ever seen is where this money's distributed out slowly. Maybe there's requirements to even get access to the money, education requirements, maybe their own saving requirements must get to a certain point before the money's given out, because the money itself will never do what life was meant to do. And that's to educate us, get us to a point where we can make better decisions. Unfortunately, money in and of itself, there ends up being resentment. I've seen it time and time again that there just never is enough money if that's all that's left. best thing you can leave them as an opportunity to learn how to fish. And we don't just give them the fish. We want to teach them how to fish. That's how we're going to help improve any of their lives, including foster kids.
And Dave, I appreciate that because again, in retirement, that's the one thing is we're trying to help not only educate ourselves, but educate those around us. And I think that's great advice with that. Dave, I want to bring up, David has a question. He's joining us from Facebook. He's saying, keeping in mind the 4% withdrawal rule in retirement, what is the recommended equity bond mix while in retirement? And does this change the withdrawal percentage because you won't be earning 8 to 10% a year anymore as when you were younger?
David, great question. So our recommendation when we look at this and how do we apply it to make the most of our retirement assets, what we want to do is we want to principal protect your age as a percentage of 100. So if you're 60 years old, someone 60 years old, we want 60% of that in principal protected products. Now, these may be structured notes, they may be annuities, they may be permanent life insurance. All of those are going to be index products that are going to outpace the bond portion of the portfolio, but not keep up with the stock portion. So generally what we like to do is say, look, leave that other, whatever's left, 40%, 50% if you're age 50, keep that in the market, but use these principal protected products as the bond portion of your portfolio, going to end up with a better result. Now you're right. We try to project about 5% distribution rates in our planning. And we try to show somewhere between a 3 and a 4% distribution rate, depending on assets that you have, depending on principal protected assets that can allow for a higher distribution rate. That may change, but you bring up very valid concerns and issues people should be looking into, because right now, I'll tell you, I see people 100% equities going into retirement right now. We have them tell us, straight to our faces, look, the market's never going to change. This is going to go on forever. 100% equities, we're going to be fine. Well, the day of reckoning is going to come. It always does.
Dave, what do you say when you get advice or get people that's sharing that information like that? Because again, on your end, you're trying to be open and you're trying to be in the educational mode. How do you handle that?
Unfortunately, usually there's nothing you can do because they're so locked into their belief and where they're at. Now, again, our side is we're trying to get people to level things out. Get yourself into a good position. Again, you may hit that home run. Maybe you're in something that's just going to keep going. Maybe you're that lucky one, but it's like the lottery. You know what? There's only a few that are going to make that happen. When we look over history and look at what happens to people, we've got to lay ourselves out. And I think when we look at your situation, David, we're not big fans of bonds, especially right now. I mean, as interest rates go up, they're going to be worse. We look at where they're at currently, they're not in a good position. So let's just remove the bonds out, use principal protected to do that, allow the options that are inside of these insurance products to protect us if the market goes down, and then use those other assets in the market so we can get those market returns that we're getting currently.
And David, thank you so much for your question. We really appreciate that, again, coming out of Facebook. And Dave, before we get going, I just want to get some final thoughts because, again, we're wrapping up 2021. It's been an exhausting year. I don't know what else to say about it, but we're definitely learning. So as we're moving into 2022, I would love your advice for those that are on here saying, okay, I need to buckle down. I need to start making these resolutions, but more than that, something a little bit deeper.
You've got to stop thinking you're going to miss out on something. Everybody thinks they're going to miss out on something. And so again, Social Security, well, I'm not going to pay into it because I have given a bunch of money to someone and I'm not going to get anything out of it. I'm going to die early. And so why in the world should I put hundreds of thousands of dollars away that then ends up going to someone else? I don't end up getting the benefit. Well, what we're finding, that's not happening. I mean, when you get into retirement CR, only about 1 to 2% of people actually die of accidental deaths. We all think, hey, we're going to get into retirement. These big accidental deaths are going to happen. We're going to pass away because we got hit by a Mack truck on the freeway. Those things are happening at very small percentages. So what we've got to do is start planning for the future. Again, remember, done this for 25 years, never had anybody come back from the other side complaining that they left too much money when they passed away. But I tell you, month after month, week after week, we've got people coming in saying, you know what, I wish I would have saved more because I'm now at an age I can't earn anymore. I can't do anything about it. And I don't have enough to live. I mean, I've got a sister that's at that place right now. Now she can go back to work. I think she's healthy enough she could do that, but hard for people to even do that. Once you've got used to retirement, hard to come back and say, you know what, even though I can work, I really have enjoyed this staying home all day. really makes it difficult emotionally. So we've got to make sure we're saving, preparing. Again, if you don't last that long, so be it. But if you do, you'll thank me, 20 years from now when you've got money in the bank and you've got a life that's still allowing you to provide the needs that you have.
So, Dave, you're telling me that next cryptocurrency that comes out today and is gone in a week, I shouldn't jump on that one?
Yeah, don't dump all your retirement assets in there if you want to. Again, we talk about 1 to 10%, small portions, depending on the assets you have. You can put in these things. But again, you want to stay away from that volatility. Volatility will kill you. And I appreciate David's question as he looks at trying to put a mix in there. Because what we're trying to do is get the returns we need, especially with inflation being what it is, but not taking so much risk that when things fall apart, especially in retirement, now we're in trouble. Again, we can't go back. When that happened, people saw 2008 and people say, hey, look, you know what, that happened. It's come back. I'm good. Why should I worry about it again? Well, if you were 40 in 2008 and weren't taking money out, whole different thing than now if you're 60, when the next crash happened, you're taking money out every month and you have to live. All of a sudden you got issues because you're not getting that money back. You're not having the time to allow those assets to come back. You're going to have to take money out and you're going to lock in all those losses.
So we're talking about the FOMO. It's that fear of missing out. But what you're saying is there's a new concept when you be looking at this is making sure that we don't have to always worry about what we're missing out on, but focus on ourselves and our retirement.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the best thing I can give anyone. Just take the time. And again, it can be fun. It doesn't have to be all pain, doesn't have to be doom and gloom. I'll tell you, as one that's come from a family that never had anything, it's been a lot more fun to be conservative and watch my spending and build up a bank account than it ever was to sit there trying to figure out how we're going to pay the bills every month and rushing to the post office box, hoping my dad's check showed up early so we could pay some bills.
And I appreciate that, Dave. And I appreciate all of you who have been with us today, especially on our live show and those on replay. Thank you for being here. All right, Dave, we're going to end this for this year. So it looks like the next episode will be next year. I can't wait for that.
Yeah, very excited, and may even be trying to think about my schedule. I may or may not be here. Trying to think, I may be flying to Austin, so maybe a new guest next week. We'll have to have those discussions and figure that out.
Perfect. Well, we will look forward to that next year. I always love saying that. So we'll see you again, 11 a.m. Central next Wednesday. And again, we're here every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central. And you can find more about us at retirementriskadvisors.com. And we'll see you guys again next time.
Goodbye. Happy New Year.